Hi, my name is Jason Ponton. I'm the editor-in-chief and the publisher of MIT Technology Review, and we're here to discuss the anatomy of an attack. With me, I have Andrei Kavelets, the Chief Technology Officer of Hewlett-Packard Enterprise Security Services, and Marshall Heilman, the Vice President of Consulting at Mandiant, a FireEye company, and its Executive Director of Incident Response and Red Teaming Operations. So let me begin by talking to Andrei. Cybersecurity has been around as long as there have been networks, but in the last 5 to 10 years, and particularly in the last few years, I've detected a note of increasing anxiety. Why is the C-suite so nervous and concerned about protecting their digital assets right now?
I think you hit on an amazing point, and it is a nervousness, and it's an emotional nervousness, and it's about something people don't understand. We've had, espionage, criminals, and fanatics for hundreds, if not thousands of years. But at this point in time, they're operating in a very unregulated and asymmetric world, which allows them to reach into organizations almost at will, banks, governments, our own homes. And I think it's that which is driving the nervousness. And also the other key point for us to remember is that most CEOs, most board members are not technically minded, do not understand these devastating implications of a cyber breach, and are not able to really understand and go through the steps necessary when you're faced with that, that challenge in the middle of the night.
Marshall, walk me through one of these devastating breaches, a breach scenario from go to woe. What happens when you get that midnight call?
So the first thing I really should point out is that every breach is a little bit different, and every company treats it a little bit differently. So if I get that panic call at midnight saying, either we know that something devastating has happened to us, or we've been told that something devastating has happened to us, but we don't really know the reality of that, the first thing they want to understand is, can you help us out? So my very first job is to let them know that, yes, I'm a professional, you're in good hands, and I can be there, probably not at midnight, but at 1:30 in the morning, I can get there, right? And we will show up on site and we'll start helping you out. So from the moment we show up on site, we really do two different things. One is to try and understand what is the reality of their problem. Most organizations, if they've been told by an external party that something bad happened in their environment, they don't truly know what happened. Sometimes the facts get exaggerated. Sometimes we're a little bit underwhelmed by what we're told. We really don't know. So we try and sort out fact from fiction to start really helping the organization. The second thing we do is to meet with the senior technical leaders and the senior business leaders and executives to walk them through the processes they're about to find themselves in. So everything from letting them know that an investigation could take months sometimes, it's not just weeks. Letting them know that the attacker may be in their environment right now stealing data, and that's the reality of the situation. Letting them know that this may become a very public breach, in which case they're going to have to start dealing with the public perception problem as well as just the problem of what's actually in their environment. And we start dealing with public perception, it gets a little bit more hazy. Because instead of doing what's always right for the investigation, you start doing what's right for the investigation as well as what's right for public perception, which is not necessarily the same thing.
Andrei, what are the immediate questions that CEOs, CIOs, and CISOs face when they first hear about a breach?
I mean, first of all, there is a very important and vital period. That first 48 hours of a breach are really important, as they are in any crisis situation. So really, the first steps you go through are it's an understanding. It's understanding what happened, sitting down with your team, and really that's the point at which you shouldn't be facing these questions for the first time, right? This is the point at which, you are operating in a very structured environment where you have had your response plan, your crisis planning has already been developed. So you sit down and you've got representatives of the business, you've got representatives from your technical community, the cybersecurity professionals, you've got law enforcement, communications, all of these people come together to give you a composite picture of both what has happened, what is happening in your environment, and the implications and the impacts on your enterprise, on your organization, and those of your consumers. And I think that's the first, that situational awareness is the first step to really understand. And I think doing that in that hazy fog of war in the first hours in the middle of the night is something that people often miss. That very calm, deliberate first step is the hardest trick to pull off. And I think you don't get there unless you've started to prepare months in advance.
And I think it's important to point out that the absolute worst time to find out that your plan may not work in your environment or hasn't been tested in a while is when you're going through a breach. And we do see that with a lot of companies, that they realize a little bit too late that their plan wasn't necessarily the right plan for them.
I guess what shocks me, and this is a question for both of you, if cyber attacks are a given, explain why it's so hard to prevent these breaches and why companies are still addressing some of these malware attacks 5 to 10 years after we first started hearing about them. Andre?
I think there's three big competing challenges in cybersecurity, and I think it talks directly to your question. A very well-trained, well-funded, well-coordinated adversary who have a structural advantage against us. A fractured and somewhat difficult to navigate global regulatory landscape, and a brand new evolving digital landscape, and you collapse all of those together, and it's very hard for an organization to not only understand their risk, but then to invest appropriately. And I think that's the key. It's about investment. It's not about placing hundreds of individual security control points, but it's about taking a broad risk-based approach and thinking about, how do I build a resilient organization, not a secure one? There's an assumption of compromise. We must assume we've been compromised. And I think if you assume that, you change your posture. And it becomes, how do I build a resilient organization that can face these humps in the road, that can face this continual, very dynamic and relentless threat environment?
If threats are a given and our organizations are already compromised, how does a company manage for being perpetually compromised?
Yeah, so that's not an easy question to answer. It's probably the most important question we face as security professionals. And if we could all figure that question out, none of us would have jobs. We simply wouldn't be necessary anymore. So if you think about it from the perspective of a security professional at a global organization, that organization probably grew over time with many acquisitions. So you have lots of different companies with different businesses that were rammed together to make or to form one large global organization. More than likely, the people that designed those original networks are no longer working at that one global company anymore. So there's not anyone working at that company that truly understands all the different assets and technologies that are involved in that global organization. That combined with the explosion of digital technologies, as you pointed out, and users, myself included, feelings of ownership of our devices, right, and wanting to have complete control over them, or also known as like the bring your own device type mentality, you have security professionals that now have to protect against every possible vulnerability under the sun in their organization, and they simply don't have the manpower or the time to do so. On the flip side of that, you have adversaries that are very well funded, as you pointed out. They're well structured, well organized, and they treat what we consider crime as a business. It is their job. So they are just as good at their job as our defenders are at theirs. However, our defenders have to protect against 1,000,001 different vulnerabilities. The attackers only have to exploit one, or maybe two. Let's make their job a little bit harder, right? But once they exploit something and get initial access into the environment, any attacker worth anything is going to be able to escalate privileges and start moving around the environment to cause whatever damage it is that he's there to cause. The other point that I should make here is historically we've looked at security as a hard, crunchy shell on the outside with a gooey interior. I think everybody understands that this is no longer the way it is. You have to accept the fact that you're going to be compromised, and you have to protect your critical assets being people, data, and systems. But the thing that we're missing as well, when we think about security, we think about how to build walls or how to build protections against an attacker from doing a thing. What we don't think about is how the attacker actually gets to do that thing. So we miss certain steps in what we call the attack lifecycle. We only try and protect against the end result of what the attacker's doing, not necessarily all the steps he has to take to get there, which would actually enable you to catch him or prevent him from causing whatever damage it is he's there to cause in the first place.
I think that's an absolutely vital point. I mean, we're talking about how an organization builds a resilient, cyber capability and how they deal with these things. And that the flaw has been about building the walls higher, about protecting that hard shell, that perimeter. Now, I think we have to accept that in the world we live in, the perimeter is somewhat dissolved and can also be compromised at will by attackers. So we have to move away from that perimeter-based approach to building security into all of the applications, the data points, the networks, the infrastructure, and the interactions between them. And then we have to move very quickly, and this is a huge shift in sort of budget and prioritization in the security space, to understanding how we detect that, that adversary within your environment. The detection and the response piece is absolutely vital, and then the recovery at the end of that. But the change and the presumption of compromise means that we no longer believe that the walls will keep the bad guys out. And once you accept that, you have to change your investment model and the controls you put in place.
I know it's a delicate issue in the security industry, but who are these bad guys? Who are the attackers?
We think about it, and it's not so much of a delicate issue. I mean, we need to be open and upfront about who's trying to cause us harm. Understanding your digital assets is one part of the risk equation. Understanding the threat facing you is the second part. And the threat falls into maybe 4 main categories: nation states, espionage, the advanced persistent threat. So really this category of very well-funded, very targeted adversary who is able to penetrate and operating for their own particular set of motivations. Then we've got a second class which is around this global cybercrime sort of cartel community. And we've seen a really interesting sort of movement from traditional crime to cybercrime. We've seen a very interesting change in the demographics of criminals. So the burglars are becoming older because people entering crime are now moving to cybercrime rather than breaking into people's homes. And I think there's a sort of a big third area which is around hacktivists or motivated groups. And if we pick on cyber terrorists or terrorists entering the cyber world, not just for financial reasons or recruitment, but actually as an active way of distributing and causing mayhem and destruction in the world. And then the fourth category, which we often skip over when we're not talking about the espionage, the criminals, and the fanatics, is the motivated and malicious insider. Somebody within your organisation who is actively trying to cause harm, who intimately understands your environment and is able to cause a disproportionate disruption to your business. And we need to understand which of these threat actors might be targeting you as an organisation and those digital assets. And that's how you build a composite view of the risk. It's by understanding the adversary and the assets you hold.
Marshall, Andre talked about advanced persistent threats. For those of us who aren't security experts, what are those? And also, what are zero-day vulnerabilities? And give us some tips on preventing, preparing for, and responding to these threats.
Sure. So an advanced persistent threat, as we would define it, is really going to be any type of organization that is being instructed to perform some type of activity by a nation state. So the nation state doesn't necessarily matter. It used to be that the term APT only applied to the Chinese, for example, but now the term has been broadened, and it could in some cases apply to the U.S. even. But there's other countries I think we've all heard of where we would apply the term or the moniker APT or advanced persistent threat to. In terms of zero-day vulnerabilities, at its core, at the core of its definition, a zero-day vulnerability is one that nobody else knows other than the person that's holding the exploit. So the very first time that exploit gets used, that is a zero-day exploit. The moment that exploit gets detected by someone, it's no longer a zero-day. So usually what you'll see, the groups that are rather advanced only pull out those zero-day exploits when they absolutely have to, and every other method has failed. Otherwise, they run the risk of losing that exploit, which they don't want to do. So the first time that they use it, they know there's a high likelihood of them getting caught. The moment it gets caught, it's no longer a zero-day exploit. And every other time that they or somebody else uses it is just a now commonly or well-known exploit that everyone's aware of.
Companies have IT departments and they have security experts working within their organizations. They spend a lot of money on it. Why do you believe they need outside help, such as what the HPE FireEye Alliance now offers?
I think that, at its very core, this is a new and evolving set of challenges. Go back to those 3 challenges. Challenge of an advanced and relentless and dynamic adversary. Keeping up to date with that and understanding the 0 days that are coming out is absolutely critical. Understanding the global regulatory patchwork and responding to that, and responding to compliance pressures. And then being able to adapt and help your organizations exploit new technologies. What that's done is that's stretched an already very thin security capability within an organization to breaking point. So being able to develop a composite view of global threat and risk, and then respond jointly in the moment of compromise where you are at your most vulnerable, where you haven't trained for this adequately, you don't understand the implications, and you're being targeted by an adversary who is naturally and systemically more adept at breaking in and changing those digital assets. Very few organizations have the wherewithal, the capabilities, and the assets to respond to that in real time. I think that's at the heart of why we work together, is to be able to place that global situational awareness, the threat research, and the core capabilities on the ground with our clients and our partners, and help them in their moment of most distress. I think it's a distressed moment, and it's a point at which you do need the calm, collected experience of people who face these breaches hundreds of times a year, not just once or twice. That experience that is built up, and the Marshal and his teams, how they respond to these things multiple times every single week, I think gives a level of experience and an understanding of the motivations of attackers, the methods they use, and how to respond to them in the most clear and effective way. And that's not something that organizations can afford to have on staff or do.
Ladies and gentlemen, this has been Andre Kavalets and Marshall Heilman and the Anatomy of an Attack.